I think the two most valuable words I've ever heard, I think, in my life are by a psychoanalyst called Bruce Fink. So he says prohibition eroticizes. It is precisely that which is taboo that will turn us on.
I'm Leeza Mangaldas, and this is Love Matters, a podcast about the relationship topics that matter to you and me. And today we're talking about kink. What does it mean to be Desi and kinky? What can we learn about consent from the kink community? And what unique possibilities for self-expression and self-discovery does kink afford its practitioners? We're going to be discussing all this and more with my wonderful guest, Jaya Sharma. Jaya is a kinky queer feminist activist and writer who's worked on issues of gender and education for over 20 years. She's also a founding member of the Kinky Collective, an organization that seeks to raise awareness around kink and strengthen the kink community in India. Jaya, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me here.
I would love to ask you to begin by telling us a little bit about your own personal journey and what drew you to kink.
So I'd like to rewind a bit. And so I've been a bit of a late bloomer in terms of sexuality. And so I think first boyfriend, first kiss, like at age 25. And as late as that, a lot of worry that my parents should not find out about him because I come from a traditional conservative family. And I knew that there would be pressure to get married. Yeah, he was a well-kept secret. When I was 35, was when I fell in lust with a woman for the first time. Till then, I thought I was straight. And then it was only at age 47, I came upon the BDSM community. Yeah, I'm 59. I turn 60 next year.
I love that with sexuality. I feel this so much in my own life as well, that the learning and self-discovery is infinite and ongoing.
Yeah. Actually, the very first encounter with kink that I could remember, it also links up to the age issue, coincidentally. So I was in England for a holiday with my girlfriend at the time, who was Chinese, but who had a girlfriend who was English. So even though they were exes, they were very close, like family. So anyway, we all decided to go out for a kink event. I had no idea what to expect. I thought if you go for a kinky event, you're meant to wear leather and something, latex, And I was a poor Indian in England, and I was hardly going to go out and invest in some kinky gear. So I remember I wore a sari, and what I did was that I wore the sari without a blouse. Okay, and this is not like typical me or anything like that. This was me a bit desperate to sort of fit in with, I don't even know what I was going to go for. So anyway, but I wore my palla like around my neck. So it was like a cross, and the cross was like going below my. So anyway, then I wore a coat on top of that, and it was a Christmas kinky ball. Okay, so it was like very, very cold. This was in Brighton. It was in the basement, and it was so cold. They obviously hadn't put the heating on. It was like a very, sort of not a fancy place. So my coat never came off. So
I am loving this story. Loving every time to be quiet as a good interviewer, but I am loving this.
I needn't have bothered with all the sort of creativity around the sari, pallu, etc. Anyway, so I sat there and I was just looking around, and like somebody sitting on a high, like a bar stool, this woman, and there's a man kneeling in front of her and massaging her feet and kissing her feet and something. And then I noticed that there was a couple. They must have been, I don't know, late 80s, I'm just guessing, or maybe even early 90s, like old couple. And so they were wearing black, both of them. And the woman was wearing a short black skirt. And she was quite delicate, like petite. And she looked a bit bird-like. And, he was quite like tall and well-built. And anyway, just seeing them together at that kink event, I was like, wow. I mean, I was like, if I ever get into kink, Like I wish I play till my dying day, you know.
I love that.
And they were like a total source of inspiration. That was one exposure. And then when I came back to India, I have a friend who met somebody on a dating app, like a regular dating app, and he turned out to be a dominant. And she discovered this whole world of like BDSM through him. And through her, I discovered the world of BDSM because she would tell me, you know, her experiences, and I was like mouth wide open, like listening with like wonder and amazement. So then I joined this online kinky space. I won't name it, even though you just need to Google it and it's the first thing that you'll find. But we are still largely an underground community, so we try not to mention the name. So it's like a kinky Facebook. We can call it Kinky Universe. Huh? It felt like I had fallen in love. I mean, it was as dramatic as that, you know, like not with a person, but just like this whole new world that had opened up. And you know, before that, like nothing, like there was no inkling that there was a kinky side to me. And I don't know, it was like triggering something in me that felt new and exciting. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I realize some of our viewers and listeners may be less familiar with some of the terminology. I'd love to ask you how you like to explain what kink is. How would you define kink? I know the dictionary says a twist in a straight line, and then it gets spoken of by people who aren't really well versed with what kink actually is, as if it's like some pathological or stigmatized, unspeakably freaky thing, or some trivial, frivolous, funny thing that, you know, you try to spice up your love life with after reading 50 Shades of Grey or something like that.
So for me, kink can be about power. It can be about pain, and it can be about fetishes. So for, you know, it's a kind of an umbrella, right? So so when it comes to power, the desire to give up control or the desire to exercise control, very simply, is power play, right? Then in terms of pain, being turned on by pain, like finding pleasure in pain, is the sadism, masochism part of kink. Yeah. And not everybody is into pain. I think one of the biggest myths around kink is that you know, that everybody is into pain, and I guess it's also the images that we see around whips and floggers and all of that. Then there are fetishes, which I guess would be when people are turned on by any part of the body or by an object that is not normally thought of as being sexual in nature, right? So like that, the Brighton kinky place. So like just the feet, you know, like I don't think he was, at least my sense is that he wasn't surrendering to all of who she was. Like her feet had some special significance erotically for him. So BDSM. So there are double acronyms involved, right? So there's bondage and discipline. That's one BD. Then there's DS, which is domination and submission. And SM. So S is both submission, but also sadism and masochism. And then there are fetishes. So then kink would be the umbrella, which includes BDSM and fetishes.
How hard is it to be desi and kinky and out? I imagine the shame and stigma around. I mean, to be a woman saying I have sex, any kind of sex is difficult here, right?
Yeah.
Let alone exploring kinky desires openly.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So, you know, there is, and I'm glad you asked that, and you are, of course, the queen of Instagram, so you know that, you know, kids who are in their 20s, on Instagram, for them, kink is the new cool. I also know younger people who are quite easily able to say, you know, to their friends or whatever, I'm kinky, dom, sub, switch is also like, you know, what you put on maybe Tinder or Hinge or whatever. You know, it's a very different, but in the 12 years that I've been in the community, I've seen that huge shift. But it's important to remember that it's for that age group who are in the metros, who are on Instagram. Okay, it's a very specific kind of. So kink is cool but for a particular category of people.
And often even for those people, there's almost a double life, which is your digital selfhood and who you have to be in front of your parents, etc., etc., you know?
Yeah.
So it's not even the cool young, the people who seem to have relative freedom, even at the apex of the privilege pyramid, are still often unable to be open to their family.
Totally. And in fact, I was just thinking before I came for this, that so as somebody who joined the LGBTQ scene, so that was when I was 35, and I sort of had to come out to my mother. The fact that I was involved with a woman, not because I wanted to, but it was the zamana of landlines, not mobile phones. And she happened to hear a conversation which didn't leave much to the imagination. And so she figured. Anyway, it was really difficult for her, difficult for me. So, but I think over time, people in my family, sort of have guessed. I've had just like last year, a very open conversation with my brother and sister-in-law. Can you imagine, so many years down the line? And with some, progressive cousins along the way. But I cannot imagine the way that I was able to tell at least a few of them about being queer. I cannot imagine having a conversation about kink. I mean, they probably, watch this or might watch this at some point, and that might be my grand outing. I mean, I don't care beyond a point, but I can't imagine sitting down and having that conversation. And I was even thinking about it before I came here. I had one thought, which is that somehow with queerness, even though queerness is not just about love, even though there's also an effort to, kind of in the whole thing about being respectable, I think there's sometimes too much focus around love, especially now with the thing about marriage. Yeah. And my own entry into the queer scene was lust and not love. So, I know, and I value the distinction, although lust turned into love. But I think with kink, I think I fear somewhere that the association would be only with sex and lust and not with love. And maybe that's not a bad thing, because I think it's important for erotic communities to also just be like, who we are, and challenging, many sexual norms, not needing the whole label of love or marriage. So in that sense, it's good. I think we're still in a good place in the BDSM community, but it also has its difficult side that you're not seen as, oh, it doesn't matter, like they say, like, okay, it's fine, even though they are two women, at least they love each other and they can't help it, and
they can't help it. Strange to me also, that in trying to legitimize what is considered non-normative or has historically been discriminated against or pathologized. There's this tendency to either try and find a biological, like, we wouldn't choose to be gay, we can't help it. I feel that's why put someone in that position where they have to justify in that. Why can't I choose? I mean, I feel this is tricky territory, a hot take. I can't even in a politically correct space make such a claim. When people say born this way, but why is it less legitimate if I want to explore desire because I want to? Why does it have to be biology or marriage that is the only sort of vehicle within which to legitimately lay claim to an identity or a desire? I wish it wasn't that way, but I think there is this tendency for something to only be respectable once it has the same trappings as the normative, which already is so flawed, right? I mean, I think heterosexuality and marriage are like the most elaborate form of drag ever. I mean, we're contorting ourselves to conform in this way where you don't even see that that it's a performance, but it so is, right? But sorry, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. This is really about you, but I have feelings.
No, that's so important. But I think that one of the reasons, two things about why kink is in that sense different from LGBT. Of course, it's an overlap. I mean, I myself am an overlap between the two, right? So I'm not, but in terms of communities, like a friend of mine in the Kinky Collective always says, that the BDSM community now seems to be where the LGBT community was 30 years ago. It really does feel like that. So, for instance, even in terms of like being on this show, that nobody else from the Kinky Collective, even though we're an activist group, nobody else can come on the show because, it's being recorded. And if this was a queer based conversation, I mean, like I can think of like 50 people like who I personally know who I would happily say, invite them for this conversation. So there's a wonderful feminist, kinky, academic, Gail Rubin, who I love. And so she talks about the charmed circle. Okay, so she says that in the middle of the charmed circle is the gender conforming, opposite sex, monogamous, married couple. Okay. And then the further you move out of that charmed circle, the greater the stigma, the more people in those marginalized sexualities are punished, and the less privileges they have. In the Indian context, of course, it would look a bit different in the sense that we would have same caste, different gotra. If you're like in North India, definitely it should be a son and not just, children, etc. But in order to uphold that core, of social power structures, whether it's patriarchy, whether it's caste, right? Because you don't want things to get messed up. You don't want intercaste marriages to be happening to dilute caste purity, or you don't want same-sex couples, because then what's going to happen to the division of labor between two people? What's going to happen about inheritance, lineage? There's, so it's not in the air. These sexual norms are very much upheld, by power and privilege. And so Gail Rubin says that LGBT people are, of course, way out. Sex workers maybe in her diagram, like after that. And she puts BDSM practitioners, sadists and masochists in the outer, one of the most outer rings of the circle. So I think the stigma is like even higher. Like I was saying, you don't even have the respectability that some now LGBT people are aspiring to. You don't even have that to fall back on. Maybe, like I was saying, maybe that's not a bad thing. But so one can see why kink-related practices are not accepted, because they're not fitting in with that a norm, right? So forget about penovaginal sex for reproduction. In kink, if what matters is power and or pain, actually penetration or sex as we know it is perhaps the least interesting thing that happens. And I can say that from personal experience. It's really, I mean, of course, you can even have penetrative sex in kinky ways that add to the power play, but that's different. It's not the centerpiece, right? So one can imagine why it would be. It's such a slap in the face of many sexual norms. It's turning upside down so many things, right? It's even turning upside down not just that sex equals penetration, it's also questioning like sex equals pleasure. Because when you bring in pain into the picture, then it's not just those nice, pleasant sensations that we're talking about, right? Then something seemingly ugly like pain, you have to contend with the fact that can be erotically extremely fulfilling.
And yet, I think if people are honest about how they experience desire and pleasure even, with a little bit of introspection, these ideas that perhaps pleasure and pain meld together in ways that are less distinct than we're allowed to generally think, or safety and adventure, or desire and disgust, or any number of different binaries that we're kind of geared socially to think of as an either or situation can actually be a both and situation. I love your phrase, yummy-yucky. And I think that that's something we don't get encouraged to interrogate, but once we do, no matter how, and I don't know how you feel about the term vanilla, but no matter how vanilla someone might see themselves as, I think you can, to some extent, empathize or recognize that there are aspects of even, everyday experiences or more traditional sex that does blur these lines, right? When you just think of an act like oral sex, I mean, it's kind of yummy-yucky in a strange sort of way. You don't want to lick just anyone's genitals, and yet with the right person, it can be the most sexy thing in the world, right? So I'd love to hear a bit more about how kink sort of unravels these easy binaries and actually how revelatory that is.
So it's all around us. It's within us, the yummy yuckiness. And so it's like, even when I'm eating golgappas, which I love, which I miss very much in Goa, the one thing I miss about Delhi, sometimes I just land in Delhi and I go straight to eat golgappas. But that whole thing of like, it's spicy and your mouth is burning and your eyes are watering, your nose might be running, but it's delicious and it's addictive, and it's like, right there you have yummy yuckiness. Or people who love running. I mean, I hate any cardio, but but people who love running, that kind of state that you get into where you are exhausted and your heart is beating fast, and that's uncomfortable, but you want to run, and you want to run a marathon or whatever. Or there's so many examples where it's not just pleasure or pain. And I think that is the stuff of life. I think life is kinky, whether we
like
it or not, or whether we call it that or not. And so life is kinky, and I think we are all kinky. It is. It's very easy to say, okay, here is one community, like it's the BDSM community, like, and they are far away from us, but we are very liberal and we are very progressive, and we will also support you, and you must not be stigmatized, and one day things will change. but you want to be allies from a safe distance, right? I've seen this in the LGBT context as well. People want to be very supportive, but almost because they want to also distance themselves from queer desire. And it's happening very much now in terms of kink. But if we go back to what I was saying earlier, the basics, that if kink is about power play, then how can we all not be kinky? Because power play and control, playing with control, little bit giving up, little taking control, it's the stuff of sex and the erotic, right? So you take something as simple as two people having sex and one person holding down the arms of the other person on the bed. Just that much. I mean, that's power play right there, right? Because the person who is holding the arms down is exercising control. The one who is being held is relinquishing control. And right there you have power play. Or then in terms of pain as pleasure, love bites, really not so exotic, or out of the ordinary. In that experience, we know that that pain can be pleasurable, right? So really it is a spectrum, and we are on that spectrum somewhere. But for, I think, some of us, kink, like you were saying, is to spice up the sex life. That's kind of one end of the spectrum. And I'm not judging that. That's fine. Why not? I mean, regular sex can get terribly boring. And at the other end of the spectrum are those of us who feel that kink is our sexual orientation, that it's really important to who we are. For instance, somebody for whom kink is a sexual orientation, and I know friends like that, who live in dread that they might have to get married to somebody from a different sexual orientation, not so different from lesbian and gay friends, So that's how important it is for many of us. It's central to our lives and who we are. And but this danger of wanting to distance oneself from kink, so I'll just give you an example that recently, we had a workshop with mental health professionals, because as the Kinky Collective, one of our fantasies, if you like, is to have a national sort of network of kink-aware mental health professionals, because it is a real problem. You go to a therapist, the last thing you want to encounter, I mean, you've anyway, had to suffer silence and internalized shame and stigma and guilt, etc. The last thing that you want to go is to a therapist who doesn't understand or who is judgmental. So we run workshops and sessions with mental health professionals. So we had the good fortune of having a 2-day workshop. We decided that we would really bring to the table this danger of othering, because the way that they, in a very well-intentioned way, they were like, we want to understand and we want to be able to help clients who are from the BDSM community, which we understood and appreciated. But we also wanted to challenge the kind of sharp distinction that they were making between themselves as progressive therapists keen to help and those kinky clients out there. Yeah. So at the end of the first day, after all our different sessions and activities and all that, so we said, why don't we do one thing, that that everybody should go home and write down a fantasy of ours, which we have not really been able to share with anyone, and then we'll come back the next morning, and you don't even have to read out your own fantasy, and nobody will see your handwriting, and like one of us will read out the fantasy for you, to help people feel safe in terms of anonymity. So next morning when we did that, lo and behold, the kinkiest fantasies ever. Okay. Yeah. I mean, everything was there, like everything from a kidnapping fantasy to like non-consent fantasy to humiliation to whatever, and then we talked about it and we said, like, like, this is wonderful because we are all on a spectrum. And and it was so sweet and so touching. There was this one therapist who was a tall, quite a tough-looking guy. And he said that when my friend from the Kinky Collective was reading out the fantasies, he said, I was holding my breath. He said, I could not breathe because I was so nervous. This is a therapist. This is somebody, like, nobody would know whose fantasy is which one, But that level of nervousness about even our fantasies, So this is a therapist kind of context. I think as a feminist, as somebody who's now I keep losing track of years as I grow older. So like, maybe 40 years or something into the women's movement in India. So as feminists, I think, and I see it now as an epidemic, okay? And now I've talked about this enough. I've made enough presentations. I've run enough workshops. I've written enough articles and got responses. I can now say, I'm not a researcher like that. I'm not a statistician. But I can say with a great deal of sadness and confidence that it's like an epidemic. Feminists thinking that they have fantasies that run counter to their feminism, that they are having the wrong kind of fantasies, that, these are not fantasies that they should be having. So this is, it's really, it just breaks my heart,
I get what you're saying. I mean, yeah. I guess particularly if you are a woman and you may find yourself aroused by the idea of being hit by a man, that or the idea of a non-consent fantasy, can seem irreconcilable with your feminism, but in fact, the realm of consensual erotic play should not be a place where we judge ourselves, right? I have heard you quote in the past Patrick Calafia, who says, the things that we think should get us wet and the things that actually get us wet aren't always the same, and that's okay, right? I'd love for you to expound on that idea, because I think it's an assumption many people make that BDSM and feminism are incompatible or somehow in conflict with each other, when in fact, kink and BDSM are established on feminist principles. And actually, we can all learn a lot about consent from the kink community.
Yeah. So I think that very counter to this idea that that kink reinforces patriarchy, that there are so many ways in which kink actually challenges patriarchy. Yeah. So just think about the woman dominant, totally in control. I mean, like totally in control of not just her own sexuality, in whoever she is playing with at that moment, totally in control of that other person's sexuality as well, of course, consensually. So then there's that kind of challenging of how women are meant to be. You're not meant to have agency. You're not meant to be in control. You're not even meant to voice what you want. And here you are like, you're running the show when you're a woman dominant, right? Or then if you're a male submissive, again, it's like if I can use Hindi, like an angutha, thenga dikhana to patriarchy. Because, men are meant to be in control. They're meant to be in charge. They're not meant to be all like vulnerable and like... So, and as a male submissive, you have men surrendering control, just like, mistress, like, tell me what to do. It's like a complete reversal of what patriarchy would like, yeah? And then you have trans folk who are also able to be in a non-judgmental space, who are also able to use consent to establish boundaries. You can touch me here, you can't touch me there. If you get my gender wrong, 20 whiplashes for you. And I know friends who've had that experience. So, for all genders, it's a space where typical sexual norms are turned on their head, even for a female submissive. Because everybody's imagination is like male dominant, woman submissive, chalo, like the most hideous form of patriarchy ever. But even for a female submissive, it's a cliche in the BDSM community, but the power does lie in the hand of the submissive, right? And I can speak as a submissive because whenever I want whatever is happening to come to an end as a submissive, all I have to do is to use the safe word. And instantaneously, unconditionally, whatever is happening will come to an end. And if I'm not surrendering power, like nobody will be able to exercise that power. So without a submissive, actually, there is no dominant. And I had that experience, if I may share, during a session. So a session is time-bound period before which the people who are engaging in BDSM or kink play, before the session starts, depending on, some people like to talk a lot, negotiate a lot, talk a lot about this is what I want, this is what you want. It can be a very elaborate a process. It can even go to the extent of some people like to use Excel sheets. Yeah.
Wow.
So Excel sheets have like hundreds of different possibilities. And then the submissive is meant to say, like, this is my hard limit. Like this, I definitely don't want to do. Like never, ever. Like don't even go there. And then there are soft limits that you can indicate, like this, I'm happy to try, or not so happy, but I can try,
people
on that
mistakenly
spectrum.
assume that there are no rules in kinky sex, but actually there are many very elaborate rules which almost allow for a sense of safety within a very adventurous playground.
Yeah, totally. And the wonderful thing is, and as it should be, kink should never be like a party line kind of situation of just one way. Even the way people do consent, and I'm saying do consent because it's a process, it's not a thing. The way that people do consent is so different. So you'll have people who like Excel sheets, who will do it like like a elaborate thing and negotiation and a lot of like what are you into and what am I into, and a lot of talking beforehand. And then at the other end of the spectrum are people like me who hate talking beforehand. Okay, I really, I mean, for me, it's like a turn off. And I just I just like want to be taken on a journey. I'm like, just take me on a journey. Like, and if I want the journey to end or to pause at some point, I will safe word, I say red if I wanted to stop altogether. I'll say orange if I wanted to slow down or, but I hate talking much beforehand. I hate even more talking during what we call playing, because I feel like it interrupts the erotic energy for me. If somebody's like checking in, how are you? Is it okay? And all that. I mean, I know it's coming from a place of concern. It's also sometimes coming from a fear of not violating consent, which is a good fear. But for me, it's something that interrupts.
Would you say the safe word, though, is such an effective and powerful tool, simple but extremely powerful tool, which allows for you to go with the flow instead of having to prescript how things are going to go in advance?
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that a bit? I just feel like it's such a valuable tool.
I'm so grateful to the safe word, because then it allows me to be able to immerse in that experience. Like, for me, it's like meditation. So safe word is a pre-decided word. So the understanding, very clear understanding, is that if the person, if anybody, either person uses the safe word, whatever is happening has to come to an end. Okay, there's no confusion. There's nothing about reading the body language or like I thought this is how you were feeling and this is how I thought your body was reacting. And, or I didn't hear something like very clearly. If you are saying the safe word, it means no. That is the indication of no. Of course, it doesn't have to be a word. It can also be a gesture. If you're, if you are unable to speak, maybe biologically unable to speak, or if you have your mouth covered or gagged, then you can maybe drop something.
A pre-agreed,
whatever it can be. Yeah, but it has to be simple.
It can't be questions asked.
Yeah,
play end,
and something that you can remember, right? It can't be some sort of like silver birch tree or something which you like, but at that moment you'll forget to say silver birch. So you just might as well just say red for the sake of simplicity, and like you'll remember it readily. But of course, it's up to the people. They can figure out whatever safe word they want to. And it's such a wonderful way to do consent. And I really like, with some sort of missionary zeal, like the next thing I want to do in life is, and maybe we can collaborate on that, is just to say that safe word is something that everybody can and should use. It's not something that's specific to the BDSM community. Of course, it's emerged from, because consent is at the heart of what we do, right? If we don't do it with consent, it's abuse. So, we are in that sense have some, it might sound a bit grand, but some kind of expertise around consent, over the years, not just as individuals, as a community. So there is that collective kind of, wisdom around consent. And I really wish it's something that everyone would try out.
I wish too, because when you think about it, I mean, the safe word practices like aftercare. I think even I know you said you don't like talking about things beforehand, but the ability to be comfortable talking about sex is something most people do not even entertain as a possibility, even if they're having sex, where there's so little spoken of that then when you do say something, it's taken as an affront. I mean, people are notoriously horrible at hearing a no.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, and a lot of my women friends would I think say the same, we've gone through sex that we didn't want to go through with because going through with it seemed like the safer way than saying stop. How horrible is that? And when you think of, even in the law, the fact that marital rape is legal, I mean, our consent is overridden legally too in within marriage, which is the most traditional, most sort of normative sexual paradigm to exist in, right? And so I think we really would do ourselves a huge service, no matter where we stand, to take a book out of card out of the BDSM book when it comes to consent.
Totally. And, like I was saying that I don't like talking much before and not during, but I really need to talk after. How was it for me? How was it for you? What might we do differently? And this thing about safety and adventure, I just feel it's such a valuable way to look at not just kink, but just life, itself. So Esther Perel, the very popular therapist who's worked with couples around the world, and there's a psychoanalyst called Stephen Mitchell, who talks about safety and adventure. So he's written that, say if you take people who've been in a serious relationship with each other over a long period of time. So he talks about how there is safety in that relationship, right? There is the warmth, there is the familiarity, all of that. And how sometimes the adventure then lies in the affair, or even in a polyamorous kind of a setting. It could be with the non-primary partner. Sometimes the adventures are happening outside of that primary relationship. So he talks about how there's a kind of a splitting between safety and adventure, and he says, of course, it needn't be like that. Safety and adventure can come together. In fact, even for that couple who's been in a relationship for 10 years or whatever, there can be. But he also talks about how we have internal fears that we ourselves maybe don't want to feel, to have adventures with the person who we are safe with. Because what if we lose that person? What if the price that we pay for adventure is to lose our source of safety? I was like, wow. I mean, it's like such a important and sounds so real. How seldom in our lives do safety and adventure actually come together. But I feel that in BDSM, I feel so grateful that the two do come together, and because we feel safe enough. We feel safe enough because of the strong culture of consent, because there's a community.
And so how large would you say the sort of kink community in a formal, structured way is in India, where even if it's underground and people aren't able to be out, at least together? Would you say that since you've been a founding member of the Kinky Collective, and it's been how many years? 12 years now. How have things evolved? How large is the community, and also how is the Indian kink community perhaps unique in some ways as compared to kink communities in, let's say, the global north?
So about the BDSM community, so on this kinky Facebook space, so I am terrible at numbers, but there might be like as many as 1 million in India, and there are people from all over the world, but just the Indians, but the people in the community who are able to meet each other in person, numbers are much smaller. Unfortunately, it's only in the bigger cities. So we organize what are called munches. Munch is a global term. So it's basically a safe space to get together, to hang out, to chat. It could be at a coffee shop, it could be at a bar or a restaurant, wherever, a public space. Lovely space to like get to meet people. There are many experiences of just the joy and wonder of finally meeting in person somebody who shares your kind of, desires or, yeah. So it's often like that kind of magical moment of like, I'm not the only one with desires like this. Very similar to what I've heard queer friends talk about, that
feel
first through the internet, and then but the magic of then meeting the other people like in flesh and blood is quite something else. And I wanted to tell you that in April in Goa, in fact, this year we had the most amazing coming together of people from the BDSM community. For the first time, the Kinky Collective organized something like this. And there were 80 of us from 11 different states for 3 days, staying in a resort, which we took over entirely. And we had to, because that was, the only way people would feel safe. But the kind of nervousness that people felt before they came, So there's this one person who was from Hyderabad and now moved to Goa, who a trans person. So they wrote an article about their experience at KingCon, and they said that before they left home, they changed the bed sheets, because they didn't know what that experience would be like, and they wanted to come back to a nice, clean bed for just the comfort of, that. I mean, it's a small detail, but that's a kind of fear and trepidation and excitement with which people came together. And it was so funny because, on this kinky universe, people are posting, including women. It's wonderful to see photos, sexy photos of themselves. And like, I haven't posted in a while, but, I also like enjoyed it so much. And, as a feminist, I had some unlearning to do also. But once I started, it's like a trippy thing to, post your own photos. So it's funny that people were joking and saying, oh, like we recognize each other from our asses, but not our faces, And so people who've been online friends for like 10 years, meeting for the first time. And so we had demonstrations, we had panels, including on feminism and kink, for which you also sent the video clip. And we had a fashion show, the most fabulous fashion show. Like no designer could ever have put together a fashion show like that. And people were so creative. We had no expectations. We thought, somebody will wear a collar and they'll come along, or somebody will carry a whip, or such high levels of creativity. I mean, I think that it's also because kink allows you to access that erotic creativity that it expresses. Maybe that's why people take such good photographs, and maybe that's why the fashion show was so fabulous. Like somebody was wearing a sari and a corset, a leather corset. I mean, what a great combination. Somebody came like a Bengali, like Babu, with like a dhoti and a kurta, a female-bodied person, a very dear friend of mine, and with the dildo underneath the kurta. It was just wild. And in fact, and no disrespect to the two people who were wearing latex. I mean, maybe if they watch this, they shouldn't feel bad. But to me, that was like the least interesting part of the fashion show. And I think they must have felt very, very hot.
I bet, in Goa.
In that latex, fitted kind of kink wear. At the end of it, just that feeling of community. It was like people were on a high, It was like a life transforming experience. And again, what I know from LGBT context, used to happen like that 30 years ago. When you come together, especially in largish numbers, it's like...
It's powerful.
Oh, really?
But so would you say that in India, I think you've hinted at it already, that it tends to be in urban spaces, that there tends to be a certain amount of privilege around who gets to access this type of community as of now. But But we also discussed that to some extent everyone is kinky. And so, of course, there are people who might want access to this sort of thing all over the country in rural areas with varying socioeconomic power. And also, I would imagine language can be a barrier because so much of the formal vocabulary and terminology, both around queerness and kink, actually tend to be this English vocabulary that we now all use in the activist sort of space. But there is, to some extent, the reality that it is not accessible to everyone, right? But correct me if I'm wrong, there have been some initiatives that you've tried to, as the Kinky Collective, kind of also reach people to whom it might not be as accessible, and there's evidence for the fact that there are kinksters literally everywhere.
Yeah, so in two ways. One is that, like, when we do workshops with mental health professionals, so some of these therapists have clients that are not just in the metros or not just in urban areas, right? Like, we did a workshop with I Call at TIS in Bombay, and I still call it Bombay. So, and they said that they get phone calls from people in small towns talking about their desires, whether it's of wanting to control or be controlled, or wanting to, inflict pain. Inflict is a loaded word, but I guess, like you're saying, when one doesn't have the language for it, exactly. In the BDSM community, we would call it impact play, which is not loaded. But I guess if somebody's calling from a small town in Maharashtra, it's like, quite likely that they will say that they like to inflict or to receive pain. So that's one way, that the more we work with therapists who have a larger outreach, that's one way. The other is that we had a workshop with sex workers. And sex workers who who work in small towns and who have their clients coming from small towns, maybe even villages. And it's very apparent that clients are coming to them with all kinds of kinky desires, right? So right there and there you have, if evidence was required, I mean, Kama Sutra gives enough evidence from thousands of years ago, but even in a contemporary context, if evidence was required, it's right there, And of course, unfortunately, it's only men who are coming to, or trans male assigned at birth people who are coming to sex workers, not women, and they're being able to pay for these services. And the sex workers are just wonderful about it, in the sense that completely non-judgmental. So in fact, it was so beautiful, like members of the Kinky Collective and the sex workers. I mean, it was so wonderful actually for these two kind of stigmatized, communities to come together and just laugh, and just like, just to be in that space of complete, like, non-judgment. And so there are many funny stories to tell about clients and what they wanted. And, they were like very matter of fact, like, if we get enough money and if we are safe enough, we want those clients, and we want repeat clients. And, we were also thinking that maybe in the future we can do some workshops with them and how they can improve their skills. In fact, it's a livelihoods issue as well. Like, if you can flog better, like, why not? Maybe you can charge more for it. We didn't get around to talking about the kinky desires of the sex workers themselves, and that's a conversation for the future. But I suspect that's going to be a more difficult conversation, because these women and transgender sex workers, of course, have experienced a lot of violence, both from families, community, from clients. And one thing that is very real and true about kink is that you have to have just a little bit of distance to be able to play with that energy, right? If you have experienced that much violence, it's not so, it won't come to you so easily to play with some of that energy, which, can look like violence, but is not violence. But you know what I mean? To play with that sort of intensity, which can involve control, which can involve physical pain. I think it's difficult for for some of the sex workers because they've suffered it so much. So what I'm trying to say is that to play with something, you need just a little bit of chink between reality and what you are trying to play with, So like a friend of mine who's also in the Kinky Collective, so he says, he's a white man, but he's lived in India for many, many years. So he says that if you are racist, you can't do race play. Race play means you play with these racial stereotypes. So you could have a black person, calling the white person who they are playing with, some very racially loaded, galis, and vice versa. But he said you can't do that if you're actually racist, because then there's no play.
Exactly.
What is the play? Then you're just being racist. So similarly, if you are a patriarchal, horrible person, man, you can't play with. You can't play with.
Does not become kink.
Yeah.
Just because it's wearing some bells and whistles, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important point, actually, because that's a big misunderstanding. There'll be these celebrity scandals around, some abuse perpetuated in the name of BDSM or something. And then unfortunately, when it comes to any stigmatized minority group, what happens is that something going wrong, which can happen anywhere, anytime, becomes seen as an indication of the whole group. Whereas when a normal man does something normal, does something wrong, which is all the time, he's just one, right? Oh, he killed his wife. Oh, okay.
Passion. No crime of passion.
But when I think, unfortunately, when and just because something is a minority community experience or stigmatized in that way, I think the language itself is so problematic. But you know what I mean? Doesn't mean that there is this burden to be perfect, right? I mean, you can have great kinky sex, underwhelming kinky sex that didn't go so well, just like you can have any kind of experience in all of those categories, right? And we should be allowed to.
Of course. And I want to just pick up on one thing. Like when you're saying minority community, and what you're describing is a moral panic.
Exactly. Sorry, Nath, thank you.
Yeah, no, but it's very good that you said the word minority. But I think the point is exactly because it's not a minority phenomenon.
Exactly.
It's because we all have kinky desires. Hence, the moral panic is even more, what's the word? Like an explosion of it, because it's touching something inside you at an unconscious level that you don't want to go there. And if you're seeing any kind of jhalak, any glimpse of it around you, you want to clamp down on it really hard and fast, like lest it, come too close to home. So, in fact, even this minority-majority thing is like, these are very safe binary categories.
Exactly. And it's not actually the minority.
Yeah, we have to stay with the reality that everybody is kinky, And I just want to add to that it's not only the mainstream society, okay? I want to come back to the point about feminism and our fear that that if we are good feminists, we shouldn't have desires like for non-consent, for humiliation, for domination, etc. And what I was saying is like an epidemic, this kind of feeling that the two are in conflict with each other, or that we are lesser feminists or bad feminists for feeling like this. I mean, for me, what really I think needs to come into the picture is a psychoanalysis. I mean, psychoanalysis sounds very heavy duty, it sounds like, some very academic thing. All I mean is that we need to remember that everything is not happening at the level of the conscious mind and the brain and what we know is happening and what we can say in words very easily. That's one part of life. There's also the unconscious at play, right? There's also the psyche at play. So, but to ignore that, we are doing it at our peril, because we have to recognize that fantasies stem from the unconscious, right? It's like dreams. If I am murdering my mother in my dream, it doesn't mean I really wanted to kill my mother. Obviously, it's saying something about my relationship with my mother, but it doesn't mean that. So fantasies can never be read in this one-to-one way. There's never a literal interpretation of fantasies, and we we should really spare ourselves going down that route, because that's not how fantasies work, just like that's not how dreams work. The other thing is, I think, to remember, I think the two most valuable words I've ever heard, I think, in my life, are by a psychoanalyst called Bruce Fink. So he says prohibition eroticizes. Okay? It is precisely that which is taboo that will turn us on. And, and they link it in a very powerful, simple way with infancy. Because as babies, like, we had access, what Freud called, we were polymorphously perverse. Means we had access to all kinds of pleasures, right? Or to do with our own body, shitting, peeing, touching, wherever. The mother was ours. Mother's breast, of course, only existed for us, when we were babies, and we thought the whole world, and certainly our mothers, or mother, because in patriarchy it's a mother, it could be any primary caregiver. So there was this kind of fantasy that we are all powerful, and there was the permission to be as perverse as we wanted to be as infants. But then as we grow up, that's when prohibitions come in, right? You cannot touch certain parts of your body. You certainly cannot play with shit and pee. And the mother is certainly not only yours. In a heterosexual context, there's the father, there's a job, there's like many other demands on her time, and she is not only yours. And then there are restrictions on your access to your mother. So prohibitions start, right? So that is why all the prohibitions, all the no's that are said to us, whether it's by a teacher, by a parent, by a boss, by a colleague, by fellow feminists, whatever it is, every time we encounter a taboo or a prohibition in our adult lives, is an unconscious reminder of what happened when we were kids and infants, right? That doesn't go away because the unconscious is like a storehouse of memories and experiences, right? So that's why every time in our adult lives we encounter a taboo or a prohibition, there is such a erotic charge around it. We know that even from bunking school, right? Bunking classes, or maybe finding our best friend's partner hot,
Anything
Savita Bhabi, whatever, that whole thing. It's like, whatever you're not meant to desire, of course you're going to desire it. So, of course, it's precisely that which is not okay is going to turn us on. Yeah. So, even in a feminist context, right? So, like, I'll just say for myself. So, feminism runs in my blood. That's how I feel, right? I mean, it's like in my blood. It's not just like, some ideology I'm subscribing to. So, and I give a damn about mainstream sexual norms, right? I've broken enough of them. But I think that breaking feminist sexual norms, I think, for me, if I were to be honest, carries like an additional kind of erotic charge, because feminism is what I respect, right? So, and I have, so mutuality, dignity, respect, consent, like all these are pillars, right? And so precious. And so when I'm playing with that, it's super hot, because it is feminist taboos that I'm playing with, and I see zero contradiction. I mean, I could have a rape fantasy, but I'm also going out on the streets and I'm protesting against rape. Where's the contradiction?
So as we wrap up, Jaya, I would love for you to share some tips for perhaps any listeners who might really resonate with this but not know where to begin. Say you're someone who acknowledges your own desires as kinky but have never had a community or a formal space to navigate this. Where can they go?
So, since I'm a member of the Kinky Collective, I think that, and that's why we exist. So we would love to hear from people, and you can find us easily on Instagram, on Twitter, Facebook. So just reach out, and so whether it's just in terms of wanting to talk, or whether people want to explore joining the community, coming for workshops, all that can be figured out. There's no one answer for everybody, but it'll be lovely to to hear from people, and hope the tribe grows.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been such a joy talking to you, Jaya. Thank
Same
you
here.
so much.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's tuned in to Love Matters today. Love Matters is produced by Indian Express and DW, Germany's international broadcaster. And we would love it if you rated and reviewed this podcast wherever you're consuming it. Of course, I'd also be thrilled if you shared it with your friends. So please do consider sharing it on social media. And if you'd like to write into us, you can do so at lovematters@dw.com. Till next time. This is Leeza Mangaldas, and I believe that love matters.